Hello world, this is London calling. Hello. Good afternoon and good morning, afternoon and evening as is appropriate to our online participants. My name is Ivana Nemčić-Osterland, and as IMI's Executive Director, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the International Mediation Institute. Thank you for joining us. We have some 50 participants in person and over 140 registered participants online joining us from across the world. Our host today is CEDAR, the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution, and we would like to thank them for opening the doors to their fabulous modern offices in the heart of the city and giving us the space for discussion. Today, we are marking World Peace Day, in a year in which we have been acutely reminded, unfortunately, once again, of the fragility of peace. The mission of IMI is to advance the mediator profession and ensure that practitioners are able to work to the highest professional standards. However, the vision runs much deeper in its heart. It is to promote consensus and access to justice. The American writer Toni Morrison has said, as you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. As IMI's new executive director, one of my dreams is for the skills disseminated through the expanding network of IMI's certified mediator training programs to have a ripple effect, to inspire and to create peaceful and resilient communities. I know, for me personally, that the skill set I acquired during my time in training were formative in how I communicate and see the world. Today, as we assemble in this place, in a space where mediation skills are disseminated and commercial mediation is practiced, we take the time to ask the question, how can mediators use their skill set to better contribute to a more peaceful and just world? I would like to recite or cite an excerpt from a thought piece by an IMI certified mediator, one whose name you must all know, Ken Cloak. He wrote, journalist Anne O'Hare McCormick wrote following World War II that the real test of power is not capacity to make war, but capacity to prevent it. To address these problems and try to prevent future wars, we require higher order skills in a rich and a diverse array of communication, collaborative negotiation, and conflict resolution techniques. But we also need new forms of diplomacy, new approaches to justice, ones that shift from competitive power and rights-based methods to collaborative, interest-based ones. IMI is based in The Hague, the city of international peace, justice, and reconciliation, and is part of its thriving peace and justice community. Today's event is a part of Just Peace Month initiative, in which we are launching the month-long video series to highlight the myriad of ways in which mediators and the IMI community are working on justice, peace building, and overcoming differences in these difficult times. It is all those contributions, big and small, that add up to a more peaceful and just world. So please do take the time to watch these short videos revealing how and when mediators have brought hope in times of adversity. Now, I would like to introduce to you Kim Taylor, the president of JAMS Mediation, Arbitration, and ADR, a leading ADR service provider and IMI's outgoing chair. JAMS Foundation has, for the last 20 years, supported conflict prevention and dispute and resolution initiatives worldwide, including IMI's work and the work of the Weinstein JAMS International Fellowship, which I have been grateful to be a benefactor of. Thank you, Kim, and please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ivana. Thank you all for being here today. It's nice to see everyone. 15 years ago, it was agreed that the best vehicle for increasing quality perception and improving understanding about mediation was an independent, nonprofit, non-service provider, global foundation designed to inspire user confidence in mediation and mediators. That foundation needed to attract supporters from all competing players in the dispute resolution market worldwide and all other stakeholders, including users, the disputants to a matter, advocates, mainly law firms, adjudicators, including judges and arbitrators, educators, academic and mediation skill trainers, and policymakers, mostly governments. Its mission would be to set transparent mediation quality standards and to explain and promote the value of resolving disputes through mediation. It was also agreed that transparency and diversity should underpin the IMI competency scheme, involving a way to make user feedback on the competency and skills of mediators to be made public for the benefit of future users. Thus, IMI came into existence aiming to address the needs of all stakeholders, starting with the users. This requires also understanding the interests of the other players in the dispute resolution field, including mediators, conciliators, law firms, and others that advise users, adjudicators such as judges and arbitrators, service providing organizations, trainers and educators, and policymakers. IMI does not compete with any other body because it does not provide training nor mediation services, but rather aims to elevate and support the mediation field through quality assurance and convening of stakeholders. JAMS was not one of the founding providers which molded IMI from an idea and vision into a functioning organization. However, recognizing the value and impact IMI was making throughout the world, JAMS joined the IMI board along with CEDAR, AAA, ICDR, ICC, SMC, SIAC, to substantively contribute to the work of the board, as well as to support the important discussions and research that were taking place, especially as the Global Pound Conference was being convened. Over the years, I personally greatly enjoyed working with the IMI's diverse board and witnessed the incredible network of IMI as the organization has grown. IMI has a network that now encompasses 78 various accredited programs in 59 organizations. The great thought leadership of IMI includes the work on the IMI Code of Professional Conduct Assessment Process, thought pieces, the Global Pound Conference data and reports, and international mixed mode task forces. In the era of the Singapore Convention and uptake of mediation throughout the world, especially in sectors in which elements of mandating mediation are being introduced, IMI's work is becoming all the more relevant and indispensable. We use today to let the world know who and what we mediators are and what we can do to create more peace and harmony in the world, with better and more durable solutions to issues and problems of all types, not just disputes. Mediators can start by examining, knowing, and owning their own practice. We can continually ask the big questions and learn from one another and improve. I'll end with a quote from Margaret Atwood. War is what happens when language fails. Mediators have the skill set, mindset, and neutrality needed to convince people in a safe space so they can engage in constructive, honest, and open communication. How are they doing this? What opportunities exist or can be created? And what is the roadmap for more effective utilization of the incredible human resource that is the mediator? Today's first panel will explore mediators' roles in peacemaking and peacebuilding. As conflicts and crises abound worldwide, mediators' transferable skills, outlook, and mindset, as well as the structure of the mediation process, have a significant role to play. Bearing in mind that lawyers are often instrumental for mediations to be considered and their outcome to be successful, we will likewise explore mediation advocacy best practices. We will end with a panel on the important role mediators can play in enabling environmental, social, and government goals to be met by societies, as well as how they can promote the green agenda by being mindful of the way they practice and by signing the Mediators Green Pledge. Thank you for being here. We hope you enjoy the program.
My name is Tad Lim and I'm from Singapore. Very good to see everyone here and welcome to everyone who's joined us online. My privilege today is to host a panel of 3 members who have very deep experiences in peacemaking with a depth of experience in human rights, humanitarian negotiations, and international conflict resolution. that I think very few of us can hope to accomplish in a lifetime. Each of them will speak for about 12 minutes. We'll first get to hear from Anna Zerbi, who has had almost 15 years of international experience in humanitarian negotiation and mediation in Afghanistan, Syria, Darfur, and Pakistan. Dr. Mark Anstey will then speak to us about his experiences from the early 1980s and discuss peacemaking lessons drawn from his experience of the South African transition to democracy in the 1990s. Mark is a senior academy associate of the Clingendale Institute and an emeritus professor of the Nelson Mandela University. And then last but not least, of course, we'll hear from Dr. Nita Yawana Raja, who is currently Deputy Director at Oxford Process, a London-based quiet diplomacy organization. Nita was the head of the Good Officers at the Commonwealth Secretariat in London from 2009 to 2016, and she led preventive diplomatic missions to catalyze diplomatic transitions in the Commonwealth countries. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all the three panelists, listening to their collective experiences, and learning from all they can teach us about what they've learned in the course of their peacemaking experience. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to Anna, our first panelist, and Anna will speak on mediation and war, from saving lives to finding durable solutions. Anna, the floor is yours.
Hi, I hope my audio is clear and
yes.
Very well, very well. And I'll try my best to stick to the 12 minutes, I promise. And it's really a honor actually to be here today, and I wish I was there in person with you. And thanks to IMI for organizing such an inspiring event. As Ivana was saying, indeed, this year has been testing the whole world to the extreme, and has set very bad precedents to what we are all wishing for in terms of peace and justice. So very timely, and as Pat was saying, my contribution would like to look at mediation and war, and look at a little bit how mediation can help to save lives as a start in the midst of war, but also how it can help to find durable solutions when the active conflict winds down. From my experience in different countries that unfortunately were war-torn when I was there and are still unstable to date, peace starts to be built at times of conflict. It doesn't start to be built when conflict is over. And mediation is a key tool that enables taking necessary steps towards that peace, even when it seems pretty much out of reach and impossible to be found. So if we look at war and what brings into the lives of people and into a country, there are two elements that we should consider and that are quite important for working towards peace and justice. On the one hand, in the midst of conflict, there are often, if not always, people trapped between war factions. And mediation has proven to be a key tool to actually enable humanitarian actors like myself and many others to reach those people trapped in active conflict. It seems very vague, so I'll try to give a practical example from my experience, and I'll draw the example from Syria. There were many hubs, many areas in the country where the population was trapped, besieged, or encircled by different sides of the conflict, and isolated in terms of electricity, in terms of supplies, in terms of basic needs of all sorts of kinds. Medicines, food, and mediation was a key tool that enabled humanitarian actors to make the different parties involved in that besiegement or encirclement to let humanitarian aid in, or to let people sick that needed medical evacuation out of those areas. As you might imagine, mediation in those contexts is not the standard one that you might see in other contexts. There are many parties involved, and it's very rare that you will all sit in one room and actually find a space where a mediator can intervene. There are different parties that are trying their best to make these different sides reach an agreement, even if temporarily. Endless are the examples that I have in mind, particularly from Syria, but also from other countries, where literally, thanks to the intervention of different mediators, lives have been saved. So it's key, and it's moving and it's expanding more if compared to when I started my assignments 15 years ago. On the other hand, mediation is key to settle disputes between communities or people in the aftermath of active conflict, particularly at times when the judicial system is under extreme pressure or not properly functioning. And there might be higher level peace processes that might have started or not, but when active conflict is over, when factions stop actually fighting, population across the country needs to move on, but cannot wait for a countrywide resolution, and will need to settle their disputes as they move on with their lives. I have in mind particularly two examples, one from Darfur in Sudan and one from Afghanistan. In Darfur, for example, mediation was key to settle disputes between the nomads population and agricultural population. And even if mechanisms were there in the society already to settle those disputes, because of the disruption that came out of the war, these mechanisms were not functioning anymore. And through interventions, it was possible to restore at least some of them. In Afghanistan, instead, there is an interconnection between the formal justice system and the traditional one, and those disputes that are settled in the traditional one can then be registered into the formal judicial system. And interventions that rotated around settling dispute through mediation on, for example, housing, land, and property rights were particularly important, especially when it came to the rights of women that not necessarily were respected in the traditional system, and women had also problems in accessing the formal judicial system. Now, if you ask me what makes those types of mediation successful in those contexts that are by definition fairly unstable, I would say there are three key elements. The first one is about inclusion. We might have in mind peace processes as we see in television with high-profile politicians that are trying to find solutions for the country. But actually, as I was saying earlier, peace needs to be found on the ground in the communities and between people whose families have been torn apart by losses and by war. Those interlocutors, those people that have been trying to bring peace on the ground, are fundamental to actually inform broader peace processes. I'd like to also draw the attention on, particularly on women. I am member of the Mediterranean Women Mediation Network, and in that effort, we are trying to actually have women more and more involved in the whole Mediterranean, Middle East, and other countries in peace processes, because unfortunately, to date, that is still a file that has not progressed to the extent that we all wished for. The second element that I think is key is the safety and security for all those involved. As you might imagine, when there is war, people are risking their life literally in so many different ways, especially those that are exposing themselves to find solutions to the conflict. And the minute the peace process becomes highly politicized, with extensive media coverage, and with a country whose grievances are still not resolved, those very individuals that have been instrumental to find peace on the ground might become exposed. So safety and security for all those involved is key and needs to be put at the center together with the inclusion. The last point, as a humanitarian, I've seen different efforts at play to bring peace in the countries I was mentioning earlier. There are humanitarian intervention, there are longer-term development projects, there are different institutions, donors, non-governative organizations, and unfortunately, the tendency, because they are very specialized sectors, is to actually work in silos and not see the opportunities to actually cross-fertilize each other, particularly when looking at putting the building blocks for moving towards peace. So bridging those gaps existing between different efforts performed under the broader peace and security umbrella, I think is incredibly important to then move into the same direction. And that I'd like to perhaps stop here, and I'm happy to expand on any of what I shared.
Thank you, Anna. Well, at the end of the session where the three panelists have spoken, we'll ask them to provide us some reflective thoughts on what we can bring away from all the speeches and the experiences that they are sharing with us. But on now to Dr. Mark Anstey. Mark will speak about his experiences, discuss peacemaking lessons that can be drawn from the experience of the South African transition to democracy in the 1990s. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you. And I have 12 minutes, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm just setting my stopwatch. Yeah. Right, Chairperson, colleagues. In some senses, when I'm listening to a current conflict, I feel like I'm talking historically. And of course I am. I was privileged to be part of the South African change process in a small way, as in a mediation capacity. And I'm going to give an input, perhaps just changing the shape of understanding of mediation, perhaps from a very personal perspective. The first point I want to make is that I think mediation should be understood in far broader terms than fly-in, fly-out brokerage of a formal meeting or peacemaking meeting. So I've written here, it involves the long-term, multi-tiered, multi-tracked process of working between societal groups in a conflict situation. There's a lot of mediation work that is carried out by people who would never declare themselves to be mediators. Church leaders, business leaders, trade union activists, civil society people. So the South African situation, from my perspective, was an intensely mediated transition. It was mostly inside of mediators, so external pressures, but insider mediation work, both at the constitutional talks and through some of the processes that I'm going to talk about now. So the first thing is, I'm going to suggest, think about mediation work as simply working between, in a broader perspective than a formal dispute management process. Second thing is time. The South African constitutional process took place between 1990 and 1994. a decade of change and preparatory work happened before that. I'm not going to tell you that it was deliberate. I think it was accidental in many ways, but it evolved. So we had, what I would call a revolutionary outcome through evolutionary means. And the major change, in my experience, that occurred was in 1979, 1980, there was a change in labor legislation. And that reform allowed Black workers, for the first time, access to a court of protection rather than repression. It also enabled them to form organizations of their own, elect their own representatives, manage themselves under a constitution, put forward their negotiators in a collective bargaining process, declare disputes, go on strike legally. And that saw opportunity. So many labor activists were already also political activists. And the experience of negotiating procedural agreements, recognition agreements, taking each other to court, striking each other, so on, gave a decade of real-life negotiation process experience long before the constitutional talks started. The current president of South Africa, not a job we'd wish on anyone really, learned his skills as a trade union leader. So in many ways, and I was part of a small group that set up mediation services in that environment. And labor mediators came to be used then as community mediators, political mediators, because we all came out of a similar stable of experience. Momentum for change accelerated with secret talks that occurred during that same decade between government and ANC in exile, and between Mandela in jail and the government. And then we had the momentous 1990 declaration by de Klerk, inviting people who had been banned and jailed to join him in a negotiation for a new South Africa. But the situation was fraught, extremely violent, lots of levels of communal violence, ideological violence, third forces, extremists, spoilers, how to deal with a situation of intense fragmentation. And the energy came from the churches drawing on a moral authority, and business and organized labor drawing on their experience of dealing with such situations in micro form in individual factories and across industries. So these groups came together, and the outcome eventually was a national peace accord. What was interesting, and there's a very good new book out by a woman called Dr. Liz Carmichael, who's at Oxford, called Peacemaking and Peacebuilding in South Africa, the National Peace Accord. And in there, she captures, she was actually there and on the ground, but she captures the detail of this experience. And how these diverse groups came together with a single mission, not to save South Africa constitutionally, but how to manage the violence that was getting in the way of the constitutional negotiation process. And if you read those chapters of the book, the mediator skills of networking, shuttling between and within sides, developing a common vision, convening informal and informal meetings, framing and reframing, facilitating exploration and mutual understanding, and joint drafting of proposals. Eventual outcome, a national peace accord signed by political leaders, the police, and various other 27 organizations. And what happened was there were a couple of major breakdowns in the political process. But the violence aspect was referred back all the time to the peace structures. That relieved the constitutional talks of having to deal with every issue of violence, which, as you know, is a spoiler activity. If you want to torpedo peace talks, commit an act of violence. By the outcome, there was a national body, 11 regional peace committees, and in the end, 263 local peace committees. And we took training into sort of basically every village, every small town, and set up small committees of people with diverse ideological beliefs and approaches to deal with these scenarios. There were codes of conduct for the political parties, for the police and security forces, and the local peace committees were made central to the monitoring and management of some very dangerous situations. Last point, or two, peacemaking requires leadership. It sounds trite, but leaders who mediate, there's a particular style of leadership that is required for peacemaking purposes. It uses a language of with rather than against. The famous Mandela reframing of we are inviting you, whites who oppressed us, to join us in creating a society in which there will be no one who is repressed. It's a fantastic example of reframing and remanaging or reorienting an angry group into more constructive engagement. These leaders have to have credibility inside their own groups and across to the groups that they are negotiating with, across divides and within. And internal incoherence, and I'm sure Anna will agree with me, is a major obstacle to across-table agreements. When internal groups are divided, they can't speak with a coherent voice to put pressure on a regime for change purposes. At some point, that leadership across the sides has to begin to trust each other more than the extremists and hardliners in their own sides. The history, it's often forgotten that the likes of de Klerk dismissed a large cohort of generals as the process unfolded, who were suspected of being involved in third force activities. And then reconciliation has to be led. And I'll close with just one observation. Reconciliation, in my view, takes three forms, and they can be seen in stages or separately. First is reconcile to a new power reality, a change system. Reconciling to is different to reconciling within. So there are many groups, particularly now in South Africa, who don't like one another, but none of them want to see the constitutional protections and the Bill of Human Rights lost. So they accommodate one another by reconciling within the system without necessarily liking one another. And the last, of course, is the one that we aspire to, reconciliation with, where there are new levels of relationships between parties. And South Africa managed into that change process, I think managed the first phase of its change process extraordinarily well. As somebody who was there at the time, I think we were all surprised that it had the outcome that it did. Things have become a little more distressed since, but that's another topic. Thanks very much.
Well, our final speaker for the second one is Dr. Nicholas Joanna, and to speak about Geopolitics and its impact on international conflict mediation. Peacemaking. Rita.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you for the promotion because I'm not a doctor, at least not yet. But I'm sure that well appreciated for today. Let me first thank the IMI for organizing this event and for CEDA for hosting us, and to Ivana for all the hard work you've put in to bring us all together today on International Peace Day. These are very broad comments on my part because I want to bring you from 1989 to the present. So let me just do a big Mark Rothko painting here, so to speak. What I'm going to speak about is really how geopolitics has impacted international peacemaking and mediation. So let me start with the end of the Cold War. I think most of you have been around since then, at least. From 1989 onwards, you could say that this was the heyday of UN peacemaking. It's a space where there was a little bit of collaboration, but even if not collaboration, at least non-restriction of the UN's space to make peace. So you saw a whole lot of conflicts, especially internal conflicts, come to an end. El Salvador, where Alvaro de Soto mediated the El Salvador conflict. Cambodia in 1991 by Rafiuddin Ahmed, also a UN personal envoy. Mozambique in 1992, mediated by an NGO in collaboration with the UN and Aldo Aiello. In 1994, Guatemala, UN envoy Jean Arnaud. In 1999, Sierra Leone and East Timor, Rafiuddin Ahmed in East Timor, and Francis Okello, together with ECOWAS in Sierra Leone. All these conflicts, there was a dimension of proxy war that was going on previously, which came to an end with the Cold War, which gave the space for the UN to actually act. This is really also the time where UN peacemaking and peacekeeping became really quite a big thing in international arena. This space, this wonderful space that the UN had, came to a rather abrupt stop after 9/11. Maybe we didn't realize it at that time, but 9/11 had a huge impact on the space for peacemaking. One of it was the US war on terror. What did that really do for peacemaking? Starting was the proscription of groups in internal conflicts. So let me give you an example. LTT in Sri Lanka was proscribed as a terrorist organization. And it meant that the mediators could not actually make peace with them quite easily, could not meet with them, could not invite them to meetings, etc. That space also had implications on their capability to fight the war and prosecute the war themselves, because funding was restricted for them, etc. Now, the LTT claimed that they're not a terrorist organization. They have a whole lot of justifications why they shouldn't call them a terrorist organization. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just saying that that designation restricted the space for peacemaking. Hamas in the Palestine-Israel organization, same situation. It's no longer easy for peacemakers now to meet with anybody. Lately, just a couple of years ago, in fact, I think just a year ago, there was a conflict in which I was trying to get an international oil company who was present on the ground to try to see if they would try to initiate some peace talks on the ground, because they were already there. Now, it was all going very well until literally a day or two after we talked to them, the US designated the armed group, as a terrorist organization. And there went our opportunity to talk, because that US-based oil company refused to help us initiate contact or even support the initiative from afar. So, and we were not able to initiate contact anymore. So it comes down to a very practical ability to make peace. In 2002, the creation of the ICC, those of us who believe in human rights and international law were very, very happy about this. But what impact did it have on international peacemaking? Now indicted persons were off limits to peacemakers, indicted, not found guilty yet. And that I think is a big distinction that has to be made, because just an indictment doesn't mean the person is guilty. But even then, the UN was restricted from, peacemakers were restricted from meeting with parties. For example, Joseph Kony was indicted in 2005 in the northern Uganda conflict, and that restricted President Chisano from being able to meet with Kony, and it really delayed the peace process quite a bit. In 2005, the Security Council referred Darfur to the ICC. Now, initially, we thought, wow, this is having an impact on the peace process, because there's a lot of pressure on the armed groups to actually get to the peace table and sign a peace agreement in 2006. But deals that are made under that kind of pressure don't last very long. So what happens? Within a short space of time, the agreement falls apart. 2009, al-Bashir is indicted. Now you can't meet with the president of Sudan anymore. So it becomes quite difficult now to make peace. So I'm not, again, going to say whether it was right or wrong for the ICC to indict these people. What I am saying is it restricts the capacity to make peace. From 2009 onwards, and I was involved from 2004 to 2009 in helping to create the UN's capacity to do more professional mediation, creation of the mediation support unit, the creation of the UN's database of peacemaking, etc. And we finally got Security Council to take us seriously, and the Security Council starts to make pronouncements of mediation, etc. But was that a good thing for us is another question. Because now I look back and I say, before that, the UN Secretary General had a great deal of space in terms of his good officers, when to initiate, with whom to talk, and how to do the process. Little by little, as the Security Council has gotten more involved, UN peacemakers are no longer the free agents that they used to be to shape the mediation process, no longer impartial to the conflict and the parties. And now UN mediation becomes closer to arbitration. Why do I say that? Because a council resolution provides the parameters for what the outcome should be. In Yemen, for example, the council resolution has already decided how the outcome should turn out. In Syria as well, the same thing was the case, that the UN good officers should help the parties achieve the transition. Now, let me ask you guys as mediators, do you think parties will come to the table to talk if they already know how the end is going to be? They have no ownership over the outcome. Because this is what it's becoming, and this is closer to arbitration than mediation. So I'm seeing the goodwill that we wanted from the council to create a supportive environment for peacemaking and mediation become something that is more restrictive now, peace members. The UN has also become much more normative in terms of its peacemaking. Now, normative means we should be doing this and we should be doing that. So what does normative peacemaking had as an impact to us? First of all, like I said, we're no longer impartial to all parties, because if you're designated as a terrorist or an indicted person, you can no longer invite them to the peace table, yeah? Second, you're restricted in terms of how you can mediate and what are the parameters by which you can mediate. The UN imposes its values of normative peacemaking on who should be included and how it should be done and what to mediate. So here, normative peacemaking has made it that it's very difficult to actually find an agreement between the parties, rather than everybody telling you what the agreement should look like. I'm all in favor of inclusion and to make sure that the voices of those who are voiceless is really represented in a final outcome. But the question is not whether they should be included. The question is that more important than getting those with the arms to stop fighting first? So isn't there a time and a space for when inclusion and how inclusion should be done? That's what I think we should be asking. The second, who owns the peace? Is it the parties who are fighting or everybody around them? This is a little bit like a divorce mediation, if you will. You know, is it the husband and the wife, or the husband and the husband, if you will, or the wife and the wife, who should be negotiating their divorce? Or is it the families who have decided that they like them being married or not like them being married, who should be deciding the divorce? And that's the kind of question that we should be asking in terms of peacemaking as well. You know, who should be deciding how they live within a space of a state? Is it the armed group and the government making peace and then trying to actually bring on board the civil society to actually accept this peace and open up the society for a new social contract? Or should everybody around them be telling them how to solve the conflict? Where are we now? I don't want to go too much into this because opening this up, I know will be provocative. The impact 2022 of 2022 in the Ukraine war. What has this done for our space and peacemaking? We are in an international rules-based world today. Whose rules? Made by whom? For whom? I ask this question openly to you guys because I've just spent 2 months in the other side of the world in Malaysia, and the viewpoint is very different from the viewpoint here. And the rest of the world sees this conflict quite differently. So, and the rest of the world sees the rules-based order quite differently. These questions are being posed to me because today I'm seen as Western. So I go back home and everybody puts the pressure on me to answer these questions. And I'm not representing these rules-based order, so to speak, but I am also somebody who has to subscribe to it. That's the stop signs reactions to make. Mind you, Mark gave me 2 minutes, so there you go. The last bit is on the issue of we've come to the rules-based order, making it a military victory because we have decided who is the one in wrong is valued more than making peace. So again, I ask, at what cost are we doing this? Peacemakers, we have a cancel culture today. Peacemakers cannot even have an opinion. And I'm sure once this video goes up, I will have a whole spate of Twitter comments on what I'm saying, that we should be entitled to hold these opinions and to be able to provide a check and balance to what is going on out there, to create that space for mediation. Because if we fail to do that, then what we are saying is that violence should take place because we believe we are in the right, and that it should take place because we have decided what is the right outcome, and not because we are going to speak to the other side to understand them, or at least to accept what they have to say, and then to actually find the space to make peace with them. I end with this last thought. It's by Diane Moshe, who's the former foreign minister of Israel, who helped to bring peace between Israel and Egypt. We don't need to make peace with our friends. We need to make peace with our enemies. And I think that's a quote that we would do right by remembering today in our world, especially on this day, for International Peace Day. I'm not going to share my gift with you now, but I will do so later. I'm going to end my comments here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank Anna, who came online to speak to us, Mark, and of course thank you for giving all of us lots of food for thought. A lot of us, I think, listening to you are commercial mediators. The world as we see it looks very different as a commercial mediator, and we don't have time, but I was going to ask you to help us who are commercial mediators connect the dots. You've sort of moved us away from our comfort zone, and maybe later on you could tell us, how can you bring us back? What are the one single reflective thought of you or learning point that those of us who don't do this kinds of work that you do, what can we bring it away from session 1 today? And I'm just going to steal a bit of time to ask each of you to give that one single thought that all of us can just take away from session 1 today. So maybe if I could just ask Anna to start, and then Mark and then finally Nita. that one thought that all of us here can just bring away from session 1 today. So Anna, if you're with us, could you just share with us that single thought that you think would be helpful to those of us here to bring away from today's session?
Yeah, well, listening also to the contributions of Mark and Nita, I think I'd like to circle back to a key element of mediation, which is impartiality. If impartiality cannot be there when trying to settle a dispute, going from a field level to high level, then mediation crumbles. It cannot actually happen. And if there is something that perhaps needs to be strengthened and put at the center again, is exactly that. Impartiality when in conflict zones is not just a principle, it also saves you from being understood as taking sides. And it's the cornerstone of mediation. And I think what we need when working in mediation in these settings is actually help to remind everybody that that very concept is extremely important, not just for successfully having a mediation, but also for protecting lives. So that will be the thought that this conversation has sparked.
Thank you, Anna. Mark, your thoughts?
Sure. A single thought after that was a bit difficult, but perhaps just picking up a thread is that mediators need to think very carefully about a system within which they're working. Are they mediating a conflict within a system which is legitimized by all the parties who play in it? Or are they, in fact, negotiating a conflict over a system in which the rules, the structures, the systems are not accepted by all the stakeholders in the mix? And if you're in the latter, it's uncomfortable ground for mediators in many senses, because you have to accept you're you're brokering a rule-making system rather than simply applying one which currently exists. And that means thinking out of the box, and it means, as we did sometimes, achieving what people would regard as outrageous agreements, but which were necessary to indicate commitment to parties that wanted to change the system. And then once those had been achieved, the outrageous agreements, and I can think of a few factories that we did, people came back to a more sort of sensible, they found each other and revised and reworked rules that were more sensible. But the reach out is, and the courage to make unusual decisions by your leadership groups becomes terribly important. So the people you're working with as a mediator are mediators in their own right. They have to bridge unusual ways of doing things with their own constituencies, as well as reach each other across a divide. It's difficult work being a leader in a high conflict scenario.
Thank you, Mark. Nita?
I want to pick up on the word impartiality as well. And another word which I think Mark has implied, and that is courage. He used the word leadership, but I think courage is also very important, because a mediator without courage becomes at the mercy of everybody, at the mercy of the parties, at the mercy of the international community, at the mercy of the court, at the mercy of everybody. So I think when one wants to be impartial, one has to have courage and integrity to speak the truth, regardless of who you're speaking it to. So they go hand in hand a little bit, impartiality and courage, I think, for mediators.
Can I say one?
Yep.
In response to that, impartiality does not mean unprincipled. We had a short discussion before we came in. but mediators need to locate themselves in their own ethical boundaries in terms of approaching conflicts. So although you may be doing things out of the box, it's not unprincipled. And yeah, let me leave it at that.
All right.
Totally agree with that.
Lots to think about. Thank you all for listening. Can we all put our hands together for the panel? It's back ready.
It's a piano.
So thank you, Mark, Nita, Tat, and Anna for your incredibly insightful contributions. We will now turn to the second panel, and I will call upon IMI Chair Kiri Kipel and IMI Board Member Teresa Garcia to step up to the speakers table, and we will change the setup in a bit. So this was a hard act to match, but we will do our best. In the next half hour, we will reflect on lawyers as peacemakers, and perhaps we will touch upon the future of mediation advocacy. Joining us online is Manon Schoneville, IMI certified mediator and mediations advocate, and the head of one of IMI's mediation advocacy programs. Thierry Clegall, IMI chair, is now a partner in one of France's leading law firms. And Teresa Garcia Hayes is a leading counsel in Baker Hughes, an important user and supporter of mediation, and especially now in today's world. So to start off the panel, I would ask first, Kiri. So it is World Peace Day. What could be the corporate lawyer's contribution to a more peaceful world be?
So first of all, hello everyone. Very pleased to be with you today, especially on this important symbolic day. I think maybe before thinking about lawyers or corporate lawyers, maybe as a citizen, I think every citizen has a duty to work towards peace, and every lawyer has a duty to work towards peace. If we focus on your question about corporate lawyers, I mean, historically, you would look at corporations and corporate lawyers are people who have to focus on business, doing business. I think there is a noticeable evolution here in the past decades. If I look first at the role of the corporate lawyer inside the corporation, my first exposure actually to mediation was when I received my appointment as a manager. And as a newly appointed manager, I had to attend a training focusing on resolving conflicts between your team. So, I mean, it's a focus on peace inside, which is obviously very important if you want to successfully manage a team. If you look at outside the corporation, I think we are at a fascinating turning point at the moment for corporate lawyers with the evolution of corporate social responsibility. The fact that somehow, between corporations and non-profit associations, you have converging trends. Corporations can now focus on a purpose. They can be authorized to contribute more to a civil society. And I think that it gives a lot of options and a lot of avenues for actions for corporate lawyers to work on, a peaceful setting in society at large.
And so you are a lawyer who has essentially switched hats. Now you are in a leading law firm. Previously, you were the head of Alstrom, one of France's big corporates. So what motivated you to become the head of IMI, the International Mediation Institute, and in effect, IMI's chair?
Yeah, I think as you said, when I mean, in a previous phase of my career, I spent a lot of time in-house, and when I was invited to join the board of IMI in 2017, I was general counsel of Alstom, and therefore my motivation or my focus on the board was really to represent the voice of the users and make sure that users contribute to IMI activities and IMI strategy. I went back to private practice at the time when I was asked if I could take the co-chair role with Kim, who was talking earlier. I mean, in a way, it was a wonderful opportunity to also focus more on governance and also more of the strategic vision of IMI as an institution focusing on the international promotion of mediation.
And so in these two roles that you've had, do you use mediation equally? And does your perspective on the use of mediation differ?
I think so. I mean, I think the fundamentals are the same, but I think that, looking back at my participation in various mediation as an in-house counsel, I believe that my focus was highly financials, timing perspective, and the mandate. What is your mandate? At one point in time, do you consider that the attempts have failed? At what point in time do you consider that you need to push forward to reach a settlement? And I was really, when I said time-driven, I mean I had to report internally. I had to focus on: are we going to resolve quickly this dispute? Are we going to resolve this dispute without spending unacceptable amounts in litigation costs? I think that in the past years, as a partner at a law firm, I think my focus has shifted probably more towards procedural questions and more global strategy of the mediation, including the definition of the mediator's mandate, like what will be exactly in the scope of the mediation, when is it right or not to initiate a mediation to ensure the success of mediation, because if it's not the right time, you increase the risk of failing during the mediation attempts. Having to decide whether you want to give the mediator the option to give some views on the case if the mediation fails. I'm quite heavily involved in international arbitration, so sometimes you have to decide: do we run a mediation in parallel to the arbitration proceedings? Do we want to suspend the arbitration proceedings? Does it make sense or not to ask the arbitrators to take the mediator role? And all of this, maybe more procedural issues, I think I was not approaching them with the same level of focus when I was in-house.
Hey, that's an very interesting revelation, and maybe something to discuss on an even higher level. Perhaps due to time restrictions, we will turn now to Manon Schoneville, who is joining us from the Netherlands via Zoom. Manon, so you were an in-house legal counsel and manager in major corporations like Nestle and Sharing, and then you converted to a full-time business mediator. What motivated you to pursue this career track?
Hello, everyone. It's lovely that I can be with you, even although it's digital, and also to see so many names of colleagues who I know very well. So I hope to meet in person very soon again. To get to your question, Ivana, I think we all recognize that there are some key moments, some key happenings where you suddenly get an insight and make a decision to do something differently. And for me, the first key moment was after, studying law and being a legal counsel in an organization with quite a broad palette of legal work to do. I was often a bit frustrated with the limitations of legal remedies. You could be put in the right or wrong, paying damages or not, and it did not always turn out entirely fair or having a balanced outcome. And one day I was advising a client, and I was ending with something along the lines of, I understand that this must be very frustrating for you. However, this is the most realistic legal assessment of your case, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, thank you, girl. At that time, I was still a girl. Where he said, I'm going to solve it in a commercial way. And I thought, you are so right. It really makes sense to solve it in a different approach. And so that was the first step in moving towards becoming a mediator. I decided to become a marketing manager. And being a marketing manager in international companies, actually, I worked abroad and was quite often asked if there were some issues between some of the subsidiaries and the head office where I worked. I worked in Germany at the time, and I am Dutch. So I think maybe both sides saw me a little bit as being neutral, and I was quite often asked, like, okay, why don't you, help us discuss that? And we engaged a lot on interest-based negotiations, etc. And I really liked that. And at some point, one of my colleagues with whom we were negotiating a deal said, you seem to really enjoy that. That there are people that make a living out of it. It's called mediation. And have a look at the United States and UK, where a lot of people were doing that. And I was like, oh, wow, could I be doing this every day? And so that was causing the conversion towards full-time mediator.
Perfect. If I may draw a common denominator between both your and Pierrick's contribution, it's lawyers essentially as problem solvers and looking at let's say the business way of approaching a certain matter or issue. I was struck a few weeks ago when I was in one of Austria's most prominent law offices, and their biggest promotional, let's say, billboard or artwork said, "We fight for your right," and it was made very beautifully, also using the imagery of violence, not just words, but very red, prominent. And I wonder how long it will take for such a law office to have a motto such as "we problem solve," to have your rights, to respect your rights, for example. So Manon, you are also a mediation advocate, beside being a mediator, and you are actually IMI's head of the task force, which emerged certain criteria, competency criteria for mediation advocacy. How did this whole endeavor come about, and how do you see the effectiveness of delivery of these programs?
Yeah. Well, at the time, we saw that mediation was developing, and there were lots of mediators, great mediators with good quality. we also saw a little bit that the interest from law firms and interest from company lawyers was not that much. And in fact, when you would ask me the question like, okay, what can company lawyers add to World Peace Day? I would say, please engage, find it important to shape the mediation field. And so it's great that people like Teresa and Pierrick are there. They are engaging, because what we very often see is that there is in one company a mediation champion or ADR champion. And once this person disappears or changes, or then suddenly there is not a lot of mediation being done anymore. So the idea at the time was, okay, so let's ensure that all groups who have a stake in the outcome of mediation being a professional business, and to ensure there's a good quality, let's also ensure that they are able to support the parties to do that. And so we looked into the role of mediation advisors and mediation advocates, because we saw that if mediation advocates have high quality, the quality of the entire mediation process is changed and elevated. And I think that we as mediators all recognize the instances where you have great mediation advisors or mediation advocates in the room who know how the process works, and you know that you find beautiful solutions. You can really dive deeply into what are the interests, and they really help sync along with our own clients and also put themselves in the shoes of the other clients. But we also have the reverse examples where lawyers can really stand in the way of helping their clients to find the best solution. But that was the thinking behind, okay, let's make some criteria, let's bring together a lot of mediators, mediation advocate, thinkers and pioneers who all together make some put their thinking on paper, like, okay, what should a good mediation advocate be able to do and know? And so there are the mediation advocacy criteria.
Perfect. And 7 organizations have been accredited so far for delivering these programs, and especially in the last 2 years, is quite picked up. But just to reflect on that, the ICA is just convened, that it was a spectacular event. How far away do you think are we from putting together a similar Congress for the International Council of International Commercial Mediators?
I don't know. I wish, but I have no idea how far away we are from that. I do see that there is more interest in a mediation advisor and mediation advocacy. There are even some countries where it is necessary to engage a mediation advocate if you do a mediation, for example, in Italy or in Greece. It is normal that lawyers are there, and I think that can really help the mediation process if they know what they are doing. Also, we, I think we were one of the first organizations that became a mediation advocacy qualifying assessment program. And it took forever to go through the first assessment. But actually this year, we are now already with the second or third person that wants to go through it. And so it is really picking up speed, and I'm also super impressed with the quality of what is being put as part of the mediation advocacy assessments.
Thank you, Manon. Yeah, I see we have 7 more minutes, so we better to Teresa, who is Senior Counsel in Litigation for Baker Hughes, so the world's first full-stream digital industrial oil and gas company. Teresa, as in-house counsel, so what are your experiences with mediation? And do you have a mediation success story that you would like to share?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to caveat all of this by saying the opinions I express here are my own and not necessarily that of my company. But I will say myself personally, I'm a huge believer in mediation. It wasn't always that way. When I was a young associate at the law firm, I was a big, my thought was mediation is sort of a necessary evil. We have to go through it in the United States in order to be able to get to litigation. And that's really where we're going to solve our disputes, because clearly if we're in litigation already or getting very close to litigation, the parties are so far apart that there's no way we're going to be able to resolve this. And I would tell you the story that kind of changed my viewpoint. Many years ago, I represented a client who had a relationship with a distributor. And unfortunately, the client got into an argument with this particular distributor, and we sued them for about $1 million in unpaid invoices, and we blocked them from buying anything further from the company. The distributor in turn said, well, I don't think I owe you the $1 million because I think there's some warranty issues. But regardless of that, I think that you breached an implicit agreement to extend my rights to distribute these products into other forums. And so therefore, I'm going to sue you for $50 million. This proceeded in the Texas courts. And in the Texas courts, you do have a requirement that you have to go to mediation before trial. And so inevitably, everybody scheduled for mediation 2 months before trial. So by the time you get there, you've already gone full stream ahead down the war path, for lack of a better word, of duking it out in court. We show up to the mediation, and you would think, okay, you have my client who thinks that they're owed $1 million, and you have the other side who thinks they're owed $50 million. This is very clearly a negative zone of negotiation. There's no way we're going to get this resolved. So essentially, we walked into the mediation thinking we were just going to check the box and move on to litigation. Our mediator there was actually quite good. And instead of asking us, really focusing on what our positions were, i.e. you owe me $1 million and you owe me $50 million, he started probing the parties' interests. And what he quickly determined is the distributor really didn't want $50 million. He was an older gentleman. He was trying to sell his business, and by being blacklisted and not being able to buy products from my client, he couldn't sell the business. So his only other option was to infuse cash into the business to make it more sellable. Our position was, look, we don't want to do business with you because you're not paying us. And so the mediator started exploring these positions of, here you have a gentleman that wants to sell business, and here you have a company that all they want to do is try to recoup some of their cash. And we were able to broker a deal by which we agreed to sell him a certain amount of products at a discount. And you would say, okay, well, Teresa, how did you recoup your money? With these particular products, the way they were priced, they had a very sort of healthy profit margin. So even if we gave him what was a negligible discount on our part, based on the fixed amount that we were selling to him, we could still more than recoup the $1 million that he owed us. So we actually ended up making money off of the deal by selling him these products at a discount. He was able to inject the products back into his business and eventually sell the business. This was a case that I never thought in a million years would settle. And after that, and after seeing this negotiator really use his skills to broker what I would say was a very creative deal, I became a huge, huge believer in supporting mediation.
Wow, what a fabulous story. And so who was the mediator? Not by name, but how did you find him or her?
So we found him because he was a recommendation from an outside counsel of ours. And I think that's a problem that we often face is with mediators in certain jurisdictions, you end up sort of going to the usual suspects. We were very fortunate in this case that the usual suspect was very good and actually had great mediation skills. A lot of times you're not that fortunate, and the people that you're being referred to either by your colleagues or by outside counsel are, their friends or, former, judges or retired law partners, and they really don't have the necessary skills. And I think that's where IMI can really add value, because as a user, I'm able to go and independently sort of vet people and get confidence that they have the skills that I'm or the approach that I'm looking for, or experience in a particular field or jurisdiction, without having to rely on, my outside counsel's best friend from law school or his former retired partner. I'm sure are also very good candidates.
So may I ask, have you used IMI certificate?
We have, and actually it's one of our criteria, or one of my criteria, I should say, when we go to, for example, to institutions, and they ask us, look, what kind of qualifications are you looking for? One of the there are 2 qualifications that almost always make my list. Number 1, I'd like a diverse slate of individuals. And number 2, I would prefer for them to be IMI certified. So.
Good. I'm very happy to hear. So I would actually, go back to the initial question I posed to Pierrick, and look at the end with the broader picture, and ask you, what do you think the corporate lawyer's contribution to a more peaceful world could be?
Yeah, I think focusing very early on is this dispute right for, if it's not mediation, some sort of negotiation between the parties. Because at least in the corporate world, a lot of times the business folks, the people that are sort of having the dispute can't see clearly as to, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of decision making that's being driven by positions as opposed to interests. And there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to, okay, we're tired of dealing this. We don't like those people. Just send it to legal and have legal deal with it. And I think by injecting a negotiation phase, a cooling off phase, followed by some sort of mediation where you have an experienced neutral come in and see that there's a way to kind of drive the parties together. I would venture to say, at least 70% of the time, you're able to make some progress there. And so even if you can't resolve the entire dispute, you can resolve portions of it. So that's a much smaller scope that ends up going to litigation.
Yeah, and that's a lot of stress. That's
eliminated.
And the focus can be on actually creating something new instead of being entrenched in disputes. So that is a valuable, and of course we all do business in a way, and if we do it better, so we do have maybe a more peace of heart. So I am aware that St. Paul's Cathedral bell had sounded for our break time, but I will turn to Pierrick, as I might share, and to ask if you have any final remarks for us to end this panel.
Yeah, I think maybe to make a link between the topics and IMI more generally, the reason why several IMI board members are around in this room today is because we just had 2 days of annual board meeting. I think it's very nice to see to what extent a lot of matters we've been discussing in the past 2 days as part of the strategic evolution of IMI and IMI's role in the overall footprint of the mediation world resonates in many topics we just discussed so far, and we'll still be discussing in the next panel before we close the conference.
Thank you, Pierrick. With that, I invite you all for a short break, and we will come back into the room within 15 minutes to continue with the last panel.
I'm Monica Ridruejo. I'm enjoying this session very much. I'm a mediator based in Spain.
Monica, I'm from Argentina, so hola.
Oh, okay. Buenas tardes. So,
Buenas tardes.
I was enjoying very much, and I was listening very closely to Anna Cervi, And I noted that she mentioned the network of mediators, Mediterranean mediators. So I'm part of that territory. So I'm very interested in hearing what it actually does and whether you have activities closer to Spain than to the Middle East.
Before handing over to Anna, to clarify, yes, if you wanted to start, sharing thoughts and comments, and not wait till the end because perhaps you won't have the time and you will have to leave, I was offering during this break to start sharing thoughts. So anyone who wishes to share something or comment, please raise your hand, and so we are able to listen to each other properly and have time for everyone to speak. So Anna, all yours to answer Monica's question. Are you able to unmute? I think so, right? No, there, I just sent you.
Yeah, I think now it's working.
Perfect, yes.
Well, nice to meet you, Monica and Liliane and everyone else. And yeah, pleasure to be around the table, even if remotely. I'm Italian. I'm based in Italy. And
wonderful.
Yeah. So the Mediterranean Women Mediation Network is actually covering also Spain. There are a couple of members, I believe, that are from Spain, and it works under the umbrella of what is called the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and therefore it tries to promote inclusion of women into peace processes at different levels, high level, but also in recognition of their role in war-torn countries. So the profile of the women that are part of the network is rather mixed. So you have a number of mediators that are actually civil and business mediators, but that are also involved in their own countries or in other countries in peace in different ways. And when I say peace, I mean the whole spectrum from the active conflict phase, but also the aftermath of peace agreements. So that's a bit in very, very broad terms, and it does a lot of capacity building of women in different countries, from Libya to the Maghreb area, Middle East, but also the Balkans. And it also tries to connect women with other networks. There is the Commonwealth one, the African one, etc., etc. So that's a little bit what it does, and I'd be happy to share the references. Maybe I can share. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
If you want to put it on in the chat, if you can, or send it to me, I will be happy to share it with everyone, because it sounds amazing, the work you're doing. So congratulations on that.
It's very interesting and very necessary.
Well, thank you.
Yes, yes, I listened carefully to what you mentioned about women, in the context of a conflict crisis. So it is important to have these organizations supporting and engaging in trying to assist as necessary. So Anna just sharing the chat, so I will post it for everyone here. I'm seeing all the people that is raising their hands. I will just allow you to speak now. Let me just type this because I cannot copy paste. I don't know why. Mediators, there it is. So I'm seeing Monica, I don't know if you have anything else to add. I will hand over to someone else. Perfect. So I see Lady Justice Joyce.
Thank you, Liliana. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Perfectly fine. Nice to meet you.
Yes, lovely to meet you, Liliana. I'm from Kenya, but right now I'm in Edinburgh.
Oh.
I was attending the ICCA conference in Edinburgh, which ended today. And yeah, I wanted to share something that today being, as we're celebrating the Day of International Peace, I wanted to share something. I'm a mediator. I'm a retired judge, but now a mediator and a member of a certified international mediator, IMI, and several other mediation qualifications. Now, for the last few months, since July this year, I was mandated to reform the judiciary of South Sudan. And you know, as some of you might know, in South Sudan is operating under a revitalized peace agreement that was signed. That's what it's operating in. And one of the conditions was that there were several issues that have to be decided up to between, within 12 months. But recently the different, they met and they decided that they would extend the time. But as far as I'm concerned, together with another retired judge from Uganda, we were given this mandate to reform the judiciary within six months. They have a judiciary, but we have to reform it within 6 months. And I wanted to share this because my background, first as a judge, as a former judge, I have 44 years as a judge. And now I transited into mediation. And that background of mediation is what is helping me a lot in South Sudan as I do the work of reforming the judiciary. And I also hope that the two of us hope that we will introduce mediation into the judicial system, because they don't have anything like that going on. It's a country that is very fragile, the South Sudan, and we just hope that we'll do our best to it. But my background as both as a judge and more particularly as a mediator is what is helping me in doing the work in South Sudan. Thank you. I wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing that. I am thinking a lot of things to ask you, and I'm wondering other participants as well, because I was wondering how you as a judge, how mediation has helped you perhaps in addressing the cases you had. And yes, I am handling a lot of questions at the same time.
Okay.
No, I was wondering first that, and how important it will be for such a fragile country, as you said, to reform their judiciary system, but including mediation, because I think it will be paramount to rebuild such a society with this level of crisis and emotional situations, and actually to preserve relationships. So I was thinking if you can comment in as your judge capacity, how did you manage to merge mediation, and how are you envisioning to include mediation in this judicial reform, if you can share that?
Okay, I can comment on that. As I said, I have a judicial background of 44 years. 35 served in Kenya, magistrate, high court, court of appeal, and 9 years served at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So that's the background I have. And before I completed my term at The Hague, when I had about 3 or 4 years to go, first I trained as an arbitrator. I went to London to train as an arbitrator. Then I wasn't terribly happy with the training. I trained and passed my exams, but the fact that in mediation, I didn't see very much difference between arbitration and court process. So I went back to Center for Effective Dispute Resolution in London, and I trained as a mediator. And I think that's where I found my passion and my relevance, so that I was able to transit from being a judge who's been making orders for 44 years into a mediator, so that I assist the parties to come to a resolution of their own, by assisting them. And that was the transition I made, and it's working well for me, especially when I'm in a country that is as fragile as South Sudan. I travel there like twice a month, or sometimes once a month. Like I would work for a week or 2 weeks to help them build the judiciary. And from what I observed, I think mediation would help them a lot.
We're filtering in from the live world. Nita in the session 1 mentioned she had a gift for us. So before we start session 3, I'm gonna give us that gift, and then we'll move on to session 3. Nita, over to you.
Thank you. I prepared this last night.
Okay.
To give peacemakers a sense of their own code of ethics, own oath, if you will. So this is mine, in a way, and I'm sharing it with you because you might want to adapt it for yourselves. So this is my International Peace Day gift, if you will. And then the IMI can come up with a similar code of conduct for International Peace Day.
And for those of you in virtual land, we will make sure that we send your copy in virtual.
Just feel free to give me a thumbs up sign if you guys. Thank you.
So as you are all getting your gifts, we'll make a start on session 3 so that we make sure we finish on time. Just remind those in the audience here, the mics are picking up any noise, so the people online won't be able to hear us. Thank you. So we've been through a period of the pandemic for 2 years, uncertainty, anxiety. We come out of that period. We have the Ukraine war, which has already been mentioned, associated economic issues which are related to that. And the world at the moment is faced with accelerated social change, tension, and in that context, we're meeting on International Peace Day. And I'm going to refer back, my name's well. And in that context, I do dream and dare to dream about how IMI, how CEDA, how us as a mediation community can contribute. We spend a lot of time at CEDA and at IMI. We spent 2 days in the at a board meeting thinking about, well, how do we contribute to the problem, the issues, the conflicts, the tensions that the world have today. And one of those issues is the continuing and worsening climate emergency, issues around human rights, and obviously governance issues as well. So this session is to focus on the title ESG, which you're all familiar with. And CEDA is already seeing a number of opportunities where people are coming to us, companies, organizations coming to us and saying, we need help. We need help to facilitate where we're going to focus on this. We need help because there's difficult conversations between environmental specialists and investment officers when looking at investing, but they need to sign off now because of the environmental people. So we're already beginning to see these issues begin to evolve, and we have a role, not as in traditional disputes, but also about facilitating conversations. And I think that's one of the things I think we'll be talking about, maybe be picking up on the panel. So that turns me to the panel. Quick introductions. Those that here can see them on the screen. Elise Brew-Diggs is going to start for us. She practices international human rights law. She's also being the president of the International Criminal Defense Attorneys Association for more than 15 years. Certified IMI mediator, and is going to talk to us a lot about the issues that she's seeing in this space, and maybe to get a sense of what the challenges are. Then Dr. Carl Mackey, former CEO of CEDA, now our founder president, is online there for us. There he is. And Carl is someone at CEDA who's been leading the charge on the ESG, has been working on this for the last year or so. And he will feed in his thoughts about, how the mediation community can begin to be part of the solutions to some of the issues that Elise will flag up to us. And finally, Dr. Anna Howard, former lawyer at Freshfields, saw the light and got out. Academics, started in Singapore, then at Queen Mary, just published a really interesting book for those of you who haven't read on EU cross-border commercial mediation, so from the disputant's perspective. Highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And she's going to talk to us about the mediator's responsibility in terms of contributing to environmental issues and making sure that we limit our impact on the planet. So that's sort of the broad thing. 10 minutes I've given my speakers, because I would like to see if we can have time for either interchange between the speakers and or some questions at the end if we have time. But with that challenge, Elise, over to you.
Thanks a lot. So let me first thank Ivana for all the efforts in putting together this event and for including me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate. And thank you to CEDAR for hosting me, to James, to Carl, and to you, Susan, with whom I've developed a good working relationship in this space. And you were my trainers as a peacemaker. So I'm a peacemaker thanks to you. And Tunita was an excellent teacher also. So I'm very happy to share my thoughts here, both as an international human rights lawyer and as an international mediator on the subject of the growing crisis of climate change. In the context that James very well described, I mean, of all these crises coming together, I mean, like the pandemic, the Trump administration, the Brexit, the economic crises, the war in Ukraine, and you name it, and you have climate change that caps it all, and I mean, and the culture war, and so on and so forth. So all this context is forcing us to look at transition. We're transitioning, and climate change is forcing a reflection on using mediation as a tool for that transition, because that transition will not happen if we don't succeed at transitioning, at making sure this transition is happening in a just and fair way for all concerned, for all people. And so I'm developing ideas in that space, especially in the field of energy. And so the context that you all know is the climate crisis is growing. It's causing risk in multiple areas of our shared political economy, including global peace, including national security, business, finance. All these emerging risks are increasing the demand for peaceful conflict resolution and dispute settlement. And this is a powerful trend that will last for decades. This is not something that's just happening and will be gone tomorrow. This will be lasting for decades. So this is an extraordinary opportunity for mediator to offer alternatives and to show how creative they can be in that space. This is not something that's traditional commercial mediation. This is something where we need to think about affected communities, about labor, about corporate interest, and to be impartial about that, and civil society and state actors. So this is really a multi-partite space that needs to be occupied. The transition to net zero economy includes more than green energy. It includes technology issues, of course, but it's not just IT or science that will resolve the problem. So we can expect an explosion of disputes in this field, touching competing land claims, ecosystem services, human rights, livelihoods. And so, in my opinion, mediators can really lead the way here. They can be very innovative and critical to success, both the mediators and the stakeholders in this period of green transition. To quote the EU Commissioner, Mr. Timmerman, there will be no transition if there is not a just transition. So I mentioned it at the beginning. What does it mean, just transition? It really means that you have to make sure that whatever you do, whatever you decide to go forward with, it has to be accepted by all or most people. It has to be endorsed by stakeholders, affected communities, labor, civil society, corporations. How do you enable that just transition? By improving and increasing stakeholder consultation and engagement, and in particular by including local affected communities, indigenous people, the ones who are always left behind or left outside the process. So for that, you need to build, and talking about that, inclusive, safe space. But what does it mean to build safe space? Is it just a process, or is it really a process that's really inclusive, where dialogue will be facilitated and where people feel this is the place where we can create consensus, where we can be heard, where we can speak and really listen to others opposing warring factions with very divergent interests, as you mentioned in your case earlier. So facilitating active, people think about mediation as being a process, a done deal, but there's everything that comes before, which is the facilitation of the process and creating that space of confidence where people feel this is where I have a chance of being heard and be listened to, which is what I call, as we learned with Nita, the human factor, which is key to success. I mean, without the human factor, I think we're not going to get anywhere. So there will be a wide variety of disputes. I just want to name a few and give you a few examples, which are far more reaching than commercial ADR. And one size of mediation will not fit it all. So here's a series of situations that could give rise to mediation. Cases of physical damage and harm from impact of global warming. Think of flooding, I mean, all these flooding events. Economic disruption for major decommissioning oil and gas company and their networks of suppliers. Also the question of major investment in an energy transition, and I'll give you an example about that. Innovation required to reduce greenhouse gas in the energy sector, agriculture, forestry, construction, and a range of other sectors. Innovation is also required in technology, business models, management methods, and the economy at large. So by definition, innovation will create winners and losers and provoke disputes. So you have competing perspective and disputes even in green projects. And that's where I'll give you some examples. So green energy projects themselves, large scale infrastructure like wind farms, hydro, they have large footprint, large environmental impact, and on land, on water, on ecosystems. So you have in Norway recently, last October, Supreme Court ruled against two major wind farms, saying you have not consulted the Sami people properly, so this project is stopped, even though it was quasi-finished. And I mean, it was supposedly good for the environment. They were wind farms, but people were not consulted. In the Norwegian constitution, there is a disposition to make sure that Sami people, indigenous people are consulted. So they said it violates indigenous rights, we're stopping the project. So this is dramatic for everybody. If they had properly consulted the way they were supposed to, this project could have gone ahead. Recently, even more recently in Mexico, a big project, electricity project by EDF, French company, was stopped because they had not consulted the indigenous people. And it created a big dispute, and the indigenous people said they're trying to divide us, they're trying to part us apart. It was in the area of Oaxaca,
And the Supreme Court said, we're stopping the project. Project was stopped. So these competing perspectives where you have frames and views and options that are really different are complex. They involve many stakeholders. These competing perspective and interests entail risk of disputes, and you have to find the shared value and the benefit to make sure that you can move forward and be in the lead to find the solutions that both time and cost effective. And instead of, I mean, the court will not solve these issues. I mean, or the court have stopped these projects. So this is very, very important. The issue at stake here was free and prior informed consent, 169 of ILO conventions. It's the core of successful mediation. Needs to be built upstream from negotiations. Need to design a process that is fair, transparent, and inclusive. FPIC is also core of inclusive project governance and dispute resolution. Robust consent is key to success. Fragile consent will not lead to a true consent, will be fragile and will collapse. So these are issues that I believe mediators master and know very well. You have issues also, the social license to operate, which is what populations keep that they're achieving when they're heard. And they agree to a project because you have given them the space to be heard. But the social license has grown in importance in the last 20 years. FPIC has been very important to the social license, but the timing is now right to apply it to green infrastructure projects. So recently, the 2nd of September, the South African court revoked Shell oil and gas exploration rights because, again, indigenous people have not been properly consulted. And so they revoked the license. So you can go from social license to social contract. States, they have an interest in reinforcing the legitimacy of projects to achieve broad political support. Social license can widen to become social contract for green energy. This is much wider than granting a legal permit. So the menu of dispute resolution methods is huge. Stakeholder engagement is at the heart of it. Negotiations with all parties. And as a human rights lawyer, I especially care about people who are never heard. The indigenous people, the local communities, the affected communities that are always left out of these negotiations. A big company will come, in principle, a mining company will say, we've consulted people. They come for 2 hours, they send a huge 600-page report saying, we've consulted. People they don't even understand what's going on. So after that, they wake up or they stand up and say, no, we've not been consulted. This is not proper consultation. So you can oppose, or not necessarily oppose, but take mediation in the context of arbitration. Arbitration is a set process where basically there's no third-party beneficiary. People are not consulted. It's just between contracting parties. This is not what it's all about. This is not about contracts. And then, of course, litigation. We all know litigation is important to set the law, but it takes so long. It's so expensive. And in the end, the victims or the rights holders are not getting that much out of it. The lawyers are getting a lot, but the victims are not getting so much. So that's something quite important. And just to close, I think I'm taking too much time, but people have to play a lead role in this transition. This is really about people who will make green economy happen. You can have the best projects in the world, but if people are not part of it, it's not going to work. And so I lived a recent experience with a big mediation that I led for 6 months with workers from Southeast Asia and Chinese employers, international labor, and international European brands. And that really taught me so much about how you can set up these processes and how you can make this kind of mediation happen. So the lesson, and we can talk about it later if there's time, that I draw is the human factor. Once again, I come back to that. In that case, it lasted almost 6 months, and I was absolutely not determined not to give up and to keep going until we found a solution. And I believe my experience, I started my career as a public defender, with vulnerable people was very important to keep going, to try to find a solution. And the fact that I had experience dealing with vulnerable people and the fact that I have a caring nature, it made it come to success in a fair and equitable way for all concerned. So this experience, I really want to take it to the space of climate mediation. So this is the ideas I'm sharing with you today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Elise. I'm going to ask you a question, just because it ties in from what Nita said, because I have always thought in this climate space that now that there are actionable legal rights coming from in relation to climate, that actually would help mediation and dispute settlement, mediation take place. But listening to what Nita was saying about the rules-based order and having all these rules, and the ICC actually ended up ironically getting in the way. I wonder if we run the same risk here in climate, that people will, oh, we've got actionable rights, so we're just going to go for our legal rights, and we're not going to engage in a dialogue. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, you're going to have both. I mean, you're really going to have both. I think that, and I'm not going to make an announcement here, but I've done a lot of work in international criminal law. I do believe that the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine is finally going to lead to corporations being charged for their involvement in this conflict, because there's so much outrage about this war. I'm not saying which side it's going to go, but I mean, that again, these litigations are important to set the law,
Right, the frame.
to have a framework, but there's so many other disputes around them that there's ample space for mediation of all kinds. So we need to have it all. You need to have all these ideas, all these solutions that really, with a group of people really determined to make things work. But keeping in mind who's at stake here. These affected communities, you're removing their lands, you're removing their water, you're removing their way of living. Are we going to just impose a solution on them? It's not going to work.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
And that
Thanks a lot.
that actually leads us nicely to Carl. So because Carl's been spending the last year trying to put a mediation frame around the issues around ESG. So Carl, over to you.
Thanks, James, and thanks very much, Elise, for a very gripping presentation of some of the challenges. And actually, the problem I've been trying to wrestle with for the last couple of years, as you know, in terms of what kind of structure might contribute most helpfully, both to the mediation community, but also to the wider social and political environment. First of all, an apology to those who are actually there in person. I was due to attend in person. I was there earlier today at the Cedar offices, but had a bit of a domestic emergency, so had to go home for a period. So it was easier to stay here to join the seminar. But also very good to see some old contacts and friends in the virtual world that I'm participating in this evening. So hello to a lot of those. I suppose I should just say a little bit about the personal journey as to why I got into ESG. As many of you know, I've been heavily involved in commercial and civil litigation mediation for many, many years, and in helping to found CEDAR. About 10 years ago, I started to get involved in the human rights arena, largely through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has a system of rules for dealing with the conduct of multinationals in OECD countries and beyond, which involves members of the treaty basically having a national contact point in each country to investigate a complaint against a multinational. Well, about 10 years ago, the UK NCP asked me if I would help them test mediation in some of these cases. So I had some fascinating case studies and insights into different kinds of areas. One, for example, dealing with the last country in the world to use dangerous chemicals for leaded petrol, drilling on the UNESCO World Heritage Site, child labor in agriculture in Eastern Europe, and displacement of communities for infrastructure projects. So it brought me into the whole arena of business and human rights, as well as responsible social conduct. And I basically formed a business human rights steering group of leading particularly lawyers, but also NGOs and companies to look at how we could promote mediation more, because I've seen mediation work. My biggest surprise from these cases wasn't that mediation worked, because I was used to seeing mediation work in many contexts, but the fact there had been no dialogue between most of the NGOs involved in these cases and the companies. The companies had not gone out to seek dialogue. The NGOs had started campaigns without engaging with the companies in any depth. So I began to look for, or think about another way of approaching this. And alongside the human rights arena, I was also very conscious, because I'm interested in business strategy, personally and professionally. What was going on in the business world was a very much a broadening and intensifying of businesses' recognition of social and environmental issues, driven by NGOs, driven by politics, driven by corporate experience, to the point where, particularly in probably Western Europe, more than anywhere still, there's a real recognition that environmental, social, governance, all the stakeholder issues Elise referred to, are really critical for corporate reputation and responsibility, can really damage sustainability of companies as well as society and communities. And it's become a boardroom topic. Basically, a lot of major companies do have an ESG specialist. They have reports to the board on ESG activity. And around this ecosystem, there's grown up a huge army of regulations, rules, due diligence processes that are basically trying to keep companies in line. And at the other extreme, there are investment and financial institutions who are driven by investment in ethical products and socially responsible products. So it's in their interest as well to start investing and start gearing investment towards effective businesses and social responsibility. And this is going way beyond what used to be CSR or stakeholder capitalism, as it was once called. So there's a real opportunity there for different kinds of process, different kinds of mechanism, as Elise set out very well in terms of bringing something else to the table. And I've always thought mediation is a part of justice, largely because a mediation is very much about refining the issues between the parties, searching for interest, getting more nuanced outcomes than generally lawyers or courts bring to the table. And we've had some examples of that at this conference. So really the last year or two, we moved the project from human rights into more of an ESG frame, because that's where business is, and that's also a much stronger recognition of the environmental side of the equation, which is really critical. I launched the BHR initiative, the Human Rights Initiative, in 2019 at the Geneva UN Forum on Business and Human Rights, with about 1,000 attendees, and was really impressed at the passion that climate change activists brought to the equation. But equally, listening to them, they were wanting to close down fossil fuel companies overnight, and because they saw climate change as so critical and so important, to the planet. So there was very little room there for nuance and refinement, but we can bring that from the mediation community. So what I've been working on with CEDAR in the last year and with the steering committee is to look at how we can frame dispute resolution input as an ESG constructive mechanism for companies and for NGOs and for our societies. And in October, we're going to launch a new mechanism, the independent accountability mechanism, because I very much take Elise's point that the dispute resolution field has a vast array of instruments. It's not just about mediation. It's about chaired conversations, facilitation with communities, stakeholder dialogue. There are many, many different dimensions that ESG requires to deal with the complexity of cases that are out there. So for me, mediation, the range of ADR is really important. We need to have a range of neutrals and processes available. So the idea behind the mechanism CEDAR is going to launch is basically to say, we can bring you flexibility, but we can bring you some search for justice and search for community peace between business and many social stakeholders that are out there who want to see a better world and a better environment. So I'm hoping the IMI and other organizations will keep a close eye on this, but also participate collaboratively and actively to try and get this message out that we can really contribute something substantial, something that's quite structured, which is what the field needs, but is very responsive to people's needs and the human factor that Elise very much focused on. So I'll stop there, James, because I know we're short of time and we can maybe pick up some other aspects later.
Carl, just maybe one question, tying back to the advocacy session before. I know you've been going out speaking to a lot of lawyers in respect of this, and lawyers are often seen, I think unfairly, as the blocks. They have at least the commercial mediation. What's the lawyers' views who are working in this space in relation to the use of dispute resolution mechanisms beyond mediation, etc.?
Yeah, we used quite a lot of leading law firms to consult around the mechanism rules and what they were really looking for in clients. And what was very interesting, I found, was certainly lawyers who are immersed in this field realize the weaknesses of the litigation system. They realize the challenges that are going to be brought to corporate clients by communities and by climate change. So they are very much looking for something that is structured, that is helpful to their clients, whether they're defendants or claimants, but equally gives them the kind of flexibility to have good conversations and to have a framework that reflects your social justice, but also common sense and commercial pragmatism, which are all part of good mediation practice.
Right, thank you. So watch out for the accountability mechanism, which has been launched, I think 11th of October, I think I'm right, Carl, right?
That's right.
And Elise is just, sorry? Oh, yeah, okay. And Elise has just reminded me that Elise and Susanna have also done a podcast on several podcasts, one which will be released in the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that on the CEDA website for more detail on these topics. So we've been talking about what the mediation community can do to address these issues, but of course we have to take responsibility ourselves. So Anna is going to talk to us a little bit about what we as the mediation community can do in terms of taking responsibility for the environment.
Thank you very much, James. I will be brief because I stand between you and the drinks this evening. Well, thank you very much to Ivana for the invitation to speak today about the Mediators Green Pledge. So I'm going to pick up on a theme which Carl addressed so eloquently, independent accountability, but I'm going to be rather bold and take a very big step back to the theme which I've chosen for my short talk today, holding our thoughts accountable. So November last year, Tatlin, who is sitting in the audience there, delivered a compelling keynote address in the first worldwide seminar convened under the auspices of the Mediators Green Pledge. In identifying the pledge's potential, Tatlin shared the following words from Gandhi. Carefully watch your thoughts, for they become your words. Manage and watch your words, for they will become your actions. Consider and judge your actions, for they have become your habits. Acknowledge and watch your habits, for they shall become your values. Understand and embrace your values, for they become your shared destiny. Thank you, Tatlin. Those words have stayed with me. So if our destiny, our shared future, starts with our thoughts, as mediators, what are our thoughts towards the climate crisis? Do we think that it's sufficient that our craft is one which offers a more sustainable means of resolving disputes, a greener method of dispute resolution? Is that our contribution? Is that enough? Is our role to mediate climate change conflicts? Is that enough? Do we think that others, such as litigators, not us, need to do more? Do those whose practices pollute more need to do more? Do we feel overwhelmed, perhaps even hopeless, and unable to make any meaningful contribution? That there is little that we can do to make a difference? Do these thoughts serve us in contributing to a better future for us and for those who will come after us? What are the thoughts we need to actively cultivate if we are to do what is necessary to contribute to a better future? After all, our thoughts become our words, and our words become our actions. This theme is addressed in an excellent book, The Future We Choose, by Christiana Figueres, former UN Executive Secretary for Climate Change, and Tom Rivet-Carnat, Chief Political Strategist for the Paris Agreement and former Buddhist monk. Their book identifies 3 mindsets needed for us to collectively create a better future. The first is stubborn optimism, having steadfast confidence in our ability to solve big challenges, making the choice to tenaciously work to make the current reality better. The second is endless abundance. This mindset challenges the zero-sum paradigm that if one person wins, another person has to lose. It is a shift away from competition and towards shared winning. And the third mindset is radical regeneration, a mindset which concentrates on our capacity for supporting regeneration. You can probably see where I am going next with this. Do these mindsets sound familiar to you? Aren't these mediation mindsets? The stubborn optimism of the mediator who persists when the parties are ready to walk away, who asks that further carefully framed question at precisely the right moment, which nudges the parties beyond their impasse. The endless abundance mindset, or to use mediator terminology, the win-win mindset, moving parties away from a win-lose scarcity mindset to, in William Urie's words, expand the pie before they share it out. And radical regeneration, as mediators gently assist parties to change the way in which they see each other, or to use Lon Fuller's famous description, to reorient parties towards each other, regenerating and restoring their relationships. So can we harness these familiar mindsets to our collective endeavour as mediators to reduce our impact on the environment? This is, of course, a matter of leadership, about which the first panel spoke so eloquently. We must hold our thoughts accountable. Changing our mindset is critical to changing our actions. This is not easy. It requires persistence and sacrifices. I recently turned down a speaking opportunity that would have taken me away from a chilly winter in Britain to a sunnier climate, but would have required a 10-hour flight. I asked myself, would that really make any difference? And then I brought to mind the collective endeavour of nearly 700 signatories from all over the world of the Mediators Green Pledge, all of whom are taking action to reduce the impact of their mediation practices on the environment. All these choices add up to a significant contribution to lessening our collective impact on the environment. Led by John Sturrock QC and his inimitable vision and energy, in 2020, a small group of stubbornly optimistic mediators came together to start work on the Mediators Green Pledge. Since then, they have been joined by nearly 700 other stubbornly optimistic mediators who have signed up to the pledge, together with many supporting organisations, including IMI and CEDA. As signatories of the pledge, these mediators are taking practical steps to reduce the impact on the climate of their mediations. These steps include, for example, choosing the most environmentally friendly way to travel to their mediations, encouraging participants to consider the necessity of attending their mediation in person if that attendance would involve significant travel, using video technology for their mediations where appropriate, not requesting hard copies of documents, and reducing the environmental impact of their own workplaces. So more information on the pledge can be found at the World Media Alliance on Climate Change, womac.org. The pledge is illustrative, with examples of how mediators can reduce their impact on the environment. It is a foundation which mediators can build upon with their own measures, tailored to their own specific practices and preferences. So, will you join nearly 700 mediators from all over the world who are playing their part? Could we reach 1,000 signatories by the pledge's 2nd birthday at the end of October? That would be a remarkable achievement. Will you help us to reach that milestone? Please join us in pledging, in a spirit of shared endeavour, our contribution to humanity's survival and thriving. All are welcome and all are needed. As Attenborough reminds us, we who are alive today have the formidable task of making sure that our species does so. Thank you.
Ending on the woods of Edinburgh is a good place to end. I think we do have about 5 minutes or so before the formal end. So I'm conscious that we've been asking those in the virtual world to put in questions, and it doesn't necessarily just need to be this session. It could be the others because the speakers are still here and shout out the answers. Do we have any questions or themes that perhaps need to
we do have questions and themes, and one thing I would encourage people to do, because we recognise as a hybrid event, it's difficult for people to get their questions across. So for the people in this room, as well as the people online, we've been capturing your comments online. If you have comments here this evening, please do email IMI, and we'll include it in the roundup for the panelists to answer questions after the event, and we'll circulate them. But in terms of things that have been mentioned in terms of this panel, it is very much about the struggle and the differences. A number of people have touched on the importance of getting the right people to the table, and have resonated with the comments about lawyers being not gatekeepers but channels to potential solutions. So quite big topics. I'm not necessarily sure that they're ones that people can easily dive in and answer unless they've got comments.
Not 7:30 on a Wednesday night. What about the, thank you for the summary, and as Ivana said at the top, we'll make sure that we do come back and provide answers where we can. Those of you who are in the room with us, are there any questions that anyone is burning to ask either this panel or the other panelists who are still here?
Well, the one that I was interested in, Nina was talking about being Malaysia having a different view from Europe. I don't know whether that's something she would want to expand or not on the conflict.
Nita, did you want to expand on that?
I could, but I don't think that's a view that's only shared in Malaysia.
Okay.
A lot of my colleagues in the South, or non-West, or the rest, if you will, feel that, you know, the perspective is quite different there.
Yeah.
Couple of points that I can make is the analogy is often drawn to me about the Iraq War, and the analogy of an aggressor going in on false pretenses on top of it, and how was that treated, and the current conflict. I think that's the most comments that I hear, and I constantly find myself in a space having to justify the situation today to them. South Africa, Mark, did you want to comment on that?
No, I'd just add that I think there are a lot of African countries that have a similar view. And that a lot of this surrounds some of the uses of the responsibility to protect principle, started off with profoundly good intentions, but then seems to have been seen to have been abused for strategic reasons.
Thank you, both of you. Yeah, to you there.
I was just going to ask the panel. So I know that there was a lot of emphasis on human rights and mediation and trying to get that involved together. I was just going to ask, is there a specific procedure for people in lower income countries or people where they don't especially have like the ability to pay for mediation? How is that something that's taken on board, or?
Yeah, so I get the context of funding in these types of cases of the question. Elise?
Yeah, that's certainly something that has to be taken into account. The mediator has to be neutral, impartial, but it has to be paid by all parties. So probably the party that doesn't have money would have a symbolic contribution. But I mean, you have to reach an agreement between the parties for that to happen. But that's certainly a very important remark.
So in this context, it's probably going to be the bigger corporations or the bigger parties involved with funding, which raises issues of impartiality, and that was raised earlier on in the session.
That's the challenge.
Just quickly, there's quite a lot of demonization of lawyers. And Anita, do you want to say something about, there's a similar demonisation of military officers in armed conflict, and I think you're quite experienced on this. What would you say about the usefulness of military officers in negotiating ceasefire?
I come from a very minimal military background, so I'm always going to be supportive of the military. And Rob is smiling at you, you can see. I think expertise is very valuable at the table. And you cannot have a peace agreement in which the armed forces is not involved in to actually accept and implement a peace agreement. All wars end. Not all wars end with a peace agreement, but all wars end with a ceasefire. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, I think, for violent conflicts, that if military and the armed groups are not involved, who's going to implement the agreement that has been agreed to?
Great, thank you. I see the time is up on 1 minute over. That depends my mediator instincts for process management. So first of all, a round of applause for and now with my IMI getting out. What's that? Okay. So now with my IMI director's hat on, I've been asked by Ivana to wrap up the session. Thank you for all panelists contributing. It's been very diverse, and you've hit it from all different angles. I know I've got a lot of things out of it to think about, and I hope that you have as an audience. So thank you for IMI for and Ivana particularly for putting this on. It's been I know it's a challenge, but it's been a growing success. Thank you to the CEDA team for facilitating the facility and the logistics, the JAMS, and finally the JAMS for supporting the drinks and the canopies, which for those of you who are here are outside, which you can go and enjoy. For those of you online, all hope is not lost. You can stay online and network. And Debbie Masucci, I think, is there, former chair of IMI. Hi, Debbie. Lovely to see you.
How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. She's going to facilitate the online group for online networking.
And Lily.
And Lily, sorry, thank you. Thank you, and Lily. So if you stay online and want to have a chat and a network online, do that. We'll go on mute and we'll go and have a drink. Bye online.
Have one for me.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.